Hansel and Gretel, a stick figure story by K. Ryan Henisey. Once, not so long ago, and not so far away, there lived a poor family deep in the woods. The family was so poor that they only had a few loaves of bread left for the rest of the month, and they didn't know when they would have food again. The mother and the father stayed up late into the night, worrying about what they should do. Finally, the mother said, "I think we should take the children into the woods, and we should make them a fire and give them some loaves of bread, and we should leave them. And maybe they'll find a better life for themselves." And the father, heartbroken, said, "No, wife, no. I can't leave my children in the woods." But after many, many hours, she convinced him. It just so happened that the boy and the girl, Hansel and Gretel, were so hungry and so tired that they couldn't sleep, and so they had heard everything that their mother and father had said. And Gretel cried silently in the night. But Hansel told her, "Don't worry, everything will be all right. I'll make sure. Everything will be all right." Eventually, once everyone had fallen asleep due to exhaustion, Hansel crept outside and collected white stones all around the yard. That morning, the mother and father took Hansel and Gretel deep into the woods to collect more firewood. And as they went, Hansel would turn back, and he would drop a little white stone every so often. His mother, seeing him stop and turn, called out, "Hansel, Hansel, what is keeping you? Keep up with us." And Hansel would reply, "Oh, mother, I'm just looking back at the white cat on the roof." And she would yell, "There's no cat on the roof. That is just the sunlight, twinkling. Come, come, stay with us." Finally, they'd brought them so deep into the woods that they didn't know where they were, and Hansel and Gretel were left with a fire and a bundle of bread, and dark fell upon them. In the distance, they could hear their father chopping wood, but it wasn't really him. Late in the night, when they went to investigate, they found a stick tied to a rope banging against a tree in the wind. But Hansel wasn't afraid. He waited until the moon was full high in the sky, and then he followed his path of white stones back to the cottage, holding Gretel's hand the whole time. When they arrived home, their father was overjoyed, and their mother cried out, "Where have you been? You were supposed to keep up with us. Next time you will stay close. Indeed you will." But that night again, the mother told the father that they were going to have to take Hansel and Gretel deep into the woods and leave them there. Otherwise all of them would starve, and all of them would die. And Gretel again cried into the night, but Hansel said, "Don't worry, everything will be all right." And again, after everyone had fallen asleep, Hansel went to the door, but this time it was locked, and he couldn't get out, and he couldn't collect stones. And he wasn't quite sure what he would do, but he knew he would think of something. In the morning, again, their mother and father took them deep, deep into the woods. And Hansel would stop every so often, and this time, instead of stones, he just tore off a little piece of bread, a little crumb, and would drop it on the ground. And when his mother saw him stop, she would call out, "Hansel, what is keeping you?" And he would say, "Mother, there's a pigeon on the roof, and I am waving goodbye to it." And his mother would shout, "There's no pigeon there. It is just the light twinkling on the eaves. Now keep up." And so they went, deep into the woods, much farther than before. And their father set them before a fire and left them there. When night fell, they waited for the moon to rise up. But instead of seeing a trail of crumbs behind them, they saw nothing, for all the myriad birds of the forest had eaten every last morsel and every last crumb. They were indeed lost. So they wandered deeper and deeper into the forest, trying to find food, trying to find a way, until eventually they came to a clearing. And it was so strange and so mesmerizing, for in the center of the clearing was a house but it wasn't like any house they had seen before. It was a house made entirely of candy. It had frosting and gumdrops and gingerbread and mints and all sorts of treats and decorations, everything to delight a child, everything made of sugar. And so Hansel and Gretel ran to the house and began to fill their bellies. And then they heard a creeping as the door creaked open, and an old woman sprang out and said, "Who's there? Who's there? Who is nibbling on my house?" Now the old woman was a witch, but Hansel and Gretel didn't know this, and witches have very poor eyesight. But the children, filled now with candy, were so happy to see another person that they followed her into the house and fell asleep. Before the sun rose, the witch gathered Hansel in his sleep and locked him up in a cage, and then she put a chain around Gretel's ankle and tied her to the bedpost. And then, when they woke up, the children found that they had indeed been trapped. Hansel to be fattened up, to be eaten, and Gretel to be a worker until it was her turn too to be eaten by the wicked witch in the candy house. But Gretel was a clever girl, and she picked up a small chicken bone and gave it to Hansel and told him only to ever stick it out, never to show his own finger. And every day the witch would demand Hansel show his finger. "Give it to me, I want to see how fat you've become," she would say. And every day Hansel would stick out the chicken bone, and the witch would be angry, for he wouldn't gain any weight, no matter how much she fed him. Finally, after many weeks, she had had enough, and she demanded that Gretel light the fire in the stove. She was going to eat Hansel anyway. And so Gretel lit the fire, and she had the stove open, and the witch told Gretel that she wanted her to crawl in and make sure that it was nice and warm. Now the witch fully intended to lock Gretel in the oven and roast her up right alongside Hansel. 2 small children was just as good as 1 fat child. But Gretel, being a smart and clever girl, said that she didn't know how. It's too small, I don't think I'll fit." "What do you mean it's too small?" said the witch. "I can fit, see?" And so she pushed her head in and she began to crawl into the oven, and Gretel gave her a giant shove and slammed the door shut, locking it, roasting the witch alive inside. Hansel and Gretel freed themselves from the witch and looked around the cottage, gathering up good foods, healthy foods. And then they found a little treasure chest filled with pearls and diamonds and rubies, and Gretel put it into her pocket. And the 2 of them made their way into the woods and wandered. And for many nights they looked and searched, and eventually they found their old home, their father there. Their mother had died from hunger. Their father was almost dying, and they fed him, and they showed them the jewels, and all 3 of them lived happily ever after. The end. Be sure to visit kryanhenisey.com for more of my art, for more of my stories, and be sure to download Sleepy Safari for free to your iPad or other devices. Look for my other books as well.